Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yeah? Thank you. Here. The Imperial War Museum is a global authority on conflict and its impact on people's lives. We collect objects and stories that give an insight into people's experiences of war, preserve them for future generations, and bring them to today's audiences in the most powerful way possible. The museum was founded on the 5th of March 1917 as the National War Museum, with the mission to record events taking place during the First World War and the experiences of people from all walks of life impacted by the events. The vision of the founders was that it should be a museum for all: women, children, craftsmen, sailors, soldiers, and airmen. However, in November 1917, the name of the museum changed to Imperial War Museum to ensure that India and the Dominions would feel that their part in the war would be commemorated in the center of the empire. The founders' vision was that the museum should be a place for study and research, and a record of the toil and sacrifice of the people of Britain and the empire. Since its foundation in 1917 and up to 1920, the IWM occupied various premises and locations in London. Between 1920 and 1924, the iconic Crystal Palace became its first permanent home, and by that point, the museum had already accumulated 150,000 objects, and by 1924, it had received 4 million visitors. In 1924, space was at a premium, and the museum moved to premises in South Kensington Gardens. And in 1936, it moved to its permanent location in the former Bethlehem Hospital in Lambeth Road in London. On the outbreak of the Second World War, the museum's remit was expanded, so the legacy of that global conflict was also preserved for future generations. The Korea War was another important moment in the history of the IWM, since from then on, the museum's remit was to include all conflicts where the UK and the Commonwealth forces had been involved. IWM became many things at once: a museum, a written archive, a major national art gallery, an invaluable sound and moving image record of war and conflict. Further expansion took place in the 1970s and 1980s with the acquisition of the Duxford Airfield in 1976, HMS Belfast in 1978, the Churchill War Rooms in 1984, and finally the opening of IWM North in Manchester in 2002. Today, IWM is a family of 5 museums dedicated to uncovering the course and consequences of war and conflict, from the First World War through to present-day conflicts. The museum holds 33.5 million items across private papers, a sound archive, the first ever film archive established in the UK, a unique library collection, 10 million photographs, and one of the UK's more foremost collections of 20th and 21st century British art, as well as a treasure trove of 3D objects and artifacts. In addition, the museum hosts a wide range of public programming initiatives, from exhibitions to events and learning activities for our main audiences. Crucially, IWM is also an independent research organization, and as such, it leads an active program of groundbreaking research projects and collaborative doctoral partnerships with the higher education sector. So where does the IWM library comes into play here? It is impossible to divorce the setting up of the IWM reference library from the establishment of the museum in its entirety. In fact, its origins as a department can be traced to as early as the spring of 1917, when discussions began as to the suitability to create a library for the study of war and conflict for the benefit of scholars and the public. A library committee chaired by military historian and All Souls College librarian Charles Oman was soon established to oversee the creation of the reference library. One of the early proposals envisaged the establishment of the National War Museum Reference Library as a department of the British Museum. However, Oman had a very different idea. And that idea was based on the concept that the museum was a live museum with a live collection open to the public, or at least to that section of the public interested in its subject matter. The memorandum went further and suggested that the uses of the future library could be divided into internal, for curatorial staff who require access to materials for the purpose of cataloguing and interpreting new acquisitions, creating exhibitions, and deepening their knowledge of the subject matter, and external, for visitors interested in the subject matter, and particularly scholars and students. Consequently, granting public access to the library also required the setting up of a reading room next to the exhibition galleries. This, in turn, would have other added benefits, as external users and specialists would be able to recommend new books and materials not held by the library. According to Oman, the natural conclusion was that a regular specialist library will thus have been established alongside of the museum, open to all persons whose credentials cannot be denied. And it will be found that the library will have worked as much for the benefit of the researchers as of the staff. By October 1917, the plan for the establishment of the reference library was well defined, and a librarian, Albert Sieveking, had been appointed to oversee its future development. Cataloging and classification systems were outlined very quickly. As well as official publications, the library would acquire material relating to every trade, profession, and human activity connected with the war, and works of history and philosophical thought pertaining to its origins. The Library Committee would, in addition, consider what material relating to peace and pacifism should be acquired. While the allocation of public funds from the Treasury was being resolved, books were procured through the Stationery Office, government departments, links with British embassies in Allied and neutral countries. Many valuable donations came via the USA President Woodrow Wilson, the Library of Congress, the Italian government, and many publishers and private individuals. Foreign language material was sourced by international agencies and publishers. The holdings of the library grew exponentially in a very short period of time. In 1917, the library had already acquired 70,000 items, including books, pamphlets, documents, paper money, war tokens, stamps, ration cards, passes, and war maps. Within a year, the number of items had doubled. And by 1920, the Women's War Collection, one of the founding collections and greatest treasures of the library, was incorporated into the collection. If the procurement of stock was not left to improvisation, neither was the accommodation of books or the provision of adequate storage facilities, as well as the appointment of a librarian and library staff. When the museum moved to the Crystal Palace building in 1920, the library remained at Buckingham Palace Road, as the fluctuating temperatures in the iconic glass house building would have caused the rapid deterioration of the collection. In fact, it remained in that location until 1924, when it joined the main museum in the Imperial Institute in South Kensington. Eventually, in 1936, it moved to its present location in the Bethlehem Hospital building in Lambeth Road. During the interwar years, the library, both as a collection and as a live department within IWM, continued to grow and cement its reputation as a global authority on war and conflict. Reports from the 1920s up to the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939 provide much information about the development of the collection, which relied primarily on generous donations from the public, including gifts from abroad, book exchanges, and to a lesser extent on purchases. These reports also provide information about how the library was being managed and how the collection was being preserved, and most interestingly, how it was being used as a major public research resource. The library provided a busy in-person, postal, and telephone inquiry service. Its reading room welcomed an average of 50 to 60 visitors per month, which included a wide range of public and private organizations and individuals, representatives from foreign embassies, the military, scholars, and students, but also growing numbers of international visitors from mainland Europe, as well as far afield as Japan, China, Russia, India, the United States, South Africa, Canada, Australia, or New Zealand. When Britain entered the Second World War, on the 3rd of September 1939, the museum took the decision to cover the conflict, and the library was one of the first departments to take proactive steps to that collecting effort, which rapidly paid off. In the early days of the new global conflict, the number of inquiries grew exponentially, and despite a brief closure period at the end of August 1939, the museum decided to reopen the doors of its library to the public again. This measure was short-lived, for the war presented challenges for the city of London, which was systematically bombed by the German Luftwaffe at the end of 1940 and throughout 1941. IWM did not escape this reality, and eventually it closed its doors to the public. The library collection, which at the time comprised around 30,000 volumes, was moved to the North Devon Athenaeum in Barnstaple during June 1914. The small library team continued to be based at Lambeth Road, and they continue to deal with inquiries and to receive vast amounts of wartime material, including official publications, Ministry of Information propaganda, and very large numbers of periodicals. They endeavor to classify and index as quickly as possible these new acquisitions, which for security reasons were stored on the basement of the museum. In the second half of the 20th century, the library evolved into the Department of Printed Books and later on into the Department of Collections Access, and continued to be responsible for developing and managing the museum printed collections and for providing research services and research support to visitors. In the 1960s and 70s, the reading room was located in the iconic dome, a circular room that served the function of a chapel when the building was the home of the Bethlehem Hospital. As the century progressed and the world underwent unprecedented changes brought about by the new order that emerged from the Cold War years, the collection's coverage was widened to include continuing worldwide conflicts, the conflicts that led to independence movements in the former British Empire, conflicts at home, such as the Northern Ireland Troubles, and conversely, material that documented attempts to promote peace. Today, the rich library collection comprises over 250,000 items across 4 main categories: books and annuals, which include operational and unit histories, training manuals, histories from British and Commonwealth regiments, campaign histories, biographies, novels contemporary to wars and conflicts, and a wealth of published material relating to the economic, social, and cultural aspects of war, spanning over 100 years and covering current trends in historical research. The name Special Collections, under this category, we can find much unique and rare material, including one of the 2 known surviving copies of the Black Book, but also the Women's Library, the Women's War Collection, an extraordinary resource for anyone interested in the experiences and role of women during the First World War. When what would become the Imperial War Museum was established in 1917, the founders created a Women's War Subcommittee under the auspices of Agnes Conway, and its member began to work in April 1917. Conway performed war work that gave her valuable insights into what women had done. The overall committee took as its main objective the compilation of a thorough record of women's wartime activities. In practice, this meant collecting material from every identifiable women's organization, as well as from noteworthy individuals. In addition to assembling an archive of written matter, such as letters, reports, and pamphlets, the committee sought photographs, badges, artwork, and other material emblems of women's wartime service. Given the enormity of the task, the Women's War Subcommittee quickly created its own subsections on such issues as employment, relief work, and medicine. And collectively, they produced a voluminous and rich archive of 189 boxes. The collection is now dispersed amongst IWM wider collection, but the bulk of the written record, these 189 boxes, are within the library. This might seem surprisingly forward-thinking, but perhaps it's just simply indicative of how the role of women in society was one of the dominant social issues of the day. The library, or the collections in the library include the War Office technical and training manuals, the tribunal's collections of papers and publications relating to conscientious objectors and military tribunals during the First World War, collection of items produced by the War Office for the British Army on the Rhine after the war, and also the Left Book Club collection, a publishing group which exerted a strong left-wing influence in Great Britain from 1936 until 1948. Another important part of the library collection is the ephemera material. By this, we mean great literature that throws light on contemporary attitudes and activities, or illustrates aspects of civilian or service life during times of conflict. This part of the collection includes recruitment orders, ration cards, knitting patterns, household fact sheets, recipes, greeting cards, service forms, all kinds of things that you could imagine. Of particular significance is the IWM propaganda collection, which is one of the foremost collections of this kind in the world, and it includes airdrop propaganda, black propaganda, and other manifestations of this phenomenon. In addition, the library also holds pamphlets, leaflets, and flyers, mostly of political nature, and including party political leaflets, particularly the Communist Party of Great Britain and the Labour Party. Leaflets circulated, for example, during the Troubles in Ireland, showing differing political attitudes during the Cold War or relating to conflicts and wars such as the Spanish Civil War, Korea War, Vietnam, the Falklands, the Gulf Wars, and also contemporary conflicts of the 20th and the 21st century, particularly Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and Libya, and material relating to the activities of pressure groups such as the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, peace movements, non-conscription, and conscription objectors. And finally, the periodicals and serials, which include international journals on defense strategy and foreign affairs, service newspapers, regimental magazines, all comrade associations, newsletters, and civilian organizations' periodicals. Many of IWM First World War trench newspapers and prisoner of war journals are extremely rare, while other wartime periodicals printed in the field or even on board ships are unlikely to be easily found elsewhere. The content of the IWM library collection is broader than that of the other collections at IWM, as it includes much material covering all nations involved in war and conflict from 1914 to the present, and has a wide coverage of social, economic, political, literary, and artistic history as well as military. It therefore plays a vital role in being able to put the other IWM collections into context through this broader perspective. Furthermore, regarding the public user, it offers subject coverage that other collections in the museum might lack. This is true, for example, regarding Black history and ethnic minorities, as well as the Empire and the Commonwealth. The comprehensive regimental histories of the Indian, African, and Caribbean regiments that took part in the two world wars, for example, or the collections relating to the collections of East African newspapers in Swahili and other African languages are good examples of this. The collection is also strong in other ways, such as the self-published personal accounts of civilian and military war experiences, not only of the great and the good, but mostly of ordinary people, thus complementing and often filling gaps in the private papers collections. In recent years, the IWM Library Collection has provided much primary source material for the development of groundbreaking doctoral research under the auspices of the UK Arts and Humanities Research Council Collaborative Doctoral Awards. The scheme funds collaborative doctoral studentships in heritage institutions such as museums, libraries, and archives, which are co-supervised by staff in those institutions and by UK universities. At IWM, several of these projects have focused partly or wholly on material held in the library collection and exploring topics ranging from the relationships between advertising, propaganda, and wartime society, to the training of colonial troops that were drawn into the war effort, to the experience of British military personnel in Berlin during the Cold War. This year, a new and exciting doctoral project focusing on the Black propaganda collection will begin to shed light for the first time on an understudied topic on which IWM has one of the foremost collections in the world. In 2020, the collections access team, which managed the library collection and the museum's reading room, was amalgamated with the research and academic partnerships team to form a brand new department named Collections Access and Research, which is tasked with providing a one-stop shop for access to all the museum collections for diverse research audiences, developing new services that respond to the needs of 21st century researchers, and championing the museum's role as an independent research organization and a partner of choice for the higher education sector. This recently created department also sits within the Imperial War Museum's Institute, which is IWM's knowledge exchange and research hub, which experiments with new ways to deepen public understanding of war and conflict. Over 100 years after Charles Oman laid out his vision for what the IWM library should be and the role it should play for internal and external audiences, much has changed. But that original vision to provide public access to the collections for the specialist historian or researcher, as much as for the curious casual researcher, continues to be relevant to our team of 21st century librarians and to the diverse users of a live collection, which continues to reflect current trends in the subject matter of war and conflict, and ranging from the exploration of unrepresented stories, as told by those with direct experience of recent conflicts, the reassessment of imperial and post-imperial legacies, ecocide and environmental issues, to the role of cyber war as a new form of hybrid warfare. Thank you very much.
you very much for this introduction to not only an important British institution, but an international institution, I think, important for all of us. Are there questions in the room? May I ask a question? So in connection with your current collecting policy, are you also looking at, sorry, for the benefit of the camera. So in connection with your current collecting policies, are you also collecting really contemporary material for now? So I don't know, demonstrations or strikes or things like that. Can you tell us something about something that you recently acquired that is relevant to your collection?
Yeah, I can actually wind back. So that's a very recent acquisition. It just came last year. And sorry, it's a very recent acquisition, and it just came in May 2022. And it's a co-created book. It's a self-published book, and it was created by a non-government organization in Girona, in Catalonia, in Spain, and by people who have witnessed terrorist attacks in Kabul. The photographs in the middle show the aftermath of those attacks, and by a poet who is based in London. So the poetry is a response to the photographs, and it contains, it's almost like a concertina book, and it contains incredibly traumatic graphic material. I've just, cut off the image because, some of it cannot really be, well, it's in our collection, and obviously people will be able to access it and view it. But so that's an example of contemporary material we are collecting. And as I said, it just reflects, it's a collaboration between three different constituencies. And it's a reflection of something which, is a response, to incredibly difficult stories, and how that is being, perceived. It's also an attempt to build the bridge between the West and the Afghanistan in this case, and how people experience, that terrorist attack, and what that means for them and for the communities. And we're thinking about possibly collecting around Ukraine, but at the moment, we're just basically assessing, what we should be collecting, because there are ethical implications as well as obviously sensitivity around, the conflict, how we collect that, how we represent that in our collection. And the museum has a very active contemporary collections team that acquires material relating to contemporary conflicts such as Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq. In the library collection, we have also collected the material, primarily things which have been produced in the UK, like, for example, demonstrations against, the war in Iraq, and things like that. Yeah.
We have a question on the chat.
Yes, thank you. The question is, how do you decide what should be collected and kept and what should not be collected and kept? I'm thinking in particular of the Second World War, which was a total war that involved both the military and the civilian worlds.
Could you repeat the question again? Then?
Yes, of course. How do you decide what should be collected or kept and what should not be collected or kept? I'm thinking in particular of the Second World War, which was a total war that involved both the military and the civilian worlds.
Well, we obviously have collecting policies in the museum, so obviously those collecting policies are being reviewed on a constant basis. The First World War and the Second World War have always been strengths in the museum collection, because the museum was created at the end of the First World War as a response, to the insanity of the war. So both, those have been incredibly important to, basically develop the collection. But with regards to the Second World War, now we're trying to collect material which represents other aspects of the war. So it's not just, let's put it this way, a British perspective. So, and the other thing that we're trying to do is to work more collaboratively and in more partnership with institutions in other countries which were drawn into the war effort because of, at the time they were part of the British Empire. So it's how we represent those stories in our collection and how we work with them to make those stories better understood. So as I said, at the moment, we're just trying to ensure that our collection is more representative of different perspectives and different experiences of war. But we're very conscious that, for example, at the moment, when you look at Austrian archive, for example, a lot of the material reflects, a particular part of the demographics and in a particular part of the country as well. So we're just trying to address that and diversify those collections as much as we can. And with regards, for example, material relating to other countries which were drawn into the war effort, we're trying to work collaboratively with them to understand, what we should be collecting, or what, if we don't collect it, how we can make links with them and ensure that, that is somewhat brought into the mainstream narratives.
I actually have 2 additional questions in chat, but I'm not sure if we're going to let chat dominate here. All right. The next chat question is, does the library collect any digital materials? For example, any material related to open source investigations in regard to contemporary conflicts?
For contemporary conflicts,
Mm-hmm.
yes, we've been collecting that material all the time. And it's something that we proactively do. A lot of the material that comes to us is through donations. So we rely a lot on basically the generosity of donors. But, we also pursue, for example, material through booksellers, catalogers, antiquarian catalogers. Yeah.
The question was asking as well about digital materials. Do you do any digital collecting, electronic or online materials?
Yeah, I think, for digital material, that is another, what we have, for example, we provide access to e-resources and databases. So if you come to a research room, you should be able to access, for example, the Women's War collection is, fully fully digitized. Some of our trench journals have also been digitized and a lot of other material, but we also provide access to other e-resources which have been licensed, by, various publishers. We are getting increasingly more and more journals in digital form. Websites, for example, we just been recently offered a database of, I think, it's just basically information about people who were involved in one of the campaigns during the Second World War. So we're trying to establish how we provide access to that, because, it's one thing to, get the website, and another thing is, obviously to provide access publicly. So, we have systems to provide access to born digital content in the research room. It's something that, we've developed in the last year or so, and it's still, in a pilot stage, but.
I think we're going to have only if it's very quick. Go.
Okay, it'll be a race question. I really enjoyed learning more about the Imperial War Museum. I saw that they currently have an exhibit focusing on video games depicting war. I believe it's called War Games. Is the library and museum going to exhibit more examples of pop culture in the future?
Of war games and things, yeah. Yes, I mean, it's something that obviously, it's a very new way of, presenting war and conflict in an exhibition. And so there's been a lot of public programming around it. So there's been, for example, a games jam, video games jam, and there's been a symposium around it. And the idea is that we will engage, with particularly the gamification of not only, obviously, not just of war, but, more generally, thinking about how we can incorporate that into our public programming a lot more. For the library, yes, we will be acquiring maybe, not video games, but, material relating to how war has been represented in video games, which is quite an important aspect. And we're also in discussions about the possibility to enter into a research project relating to how, as a result of the exhibition, how war, has been presented. What is the impact of war games in society? What is the cultural value of video games in society?
I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it here, but you're here for the rest of the day, so find Maria in the coffee break if you have further questions.
Thank you.
Let us thank her again.
Thank you.